Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Springs Church. My name is Kara.
My name's Bobby, and we are so glad that you are with us today. You know, here at Mountain Springs, we have something that we say often, which is that you're not just saved from something, but you're saved for something. And that thing that you're saved for is for mission and for obeying the call of God. And so I want to let you know about an opportunity that we have coming up on April 29th called City Serve. It's a great opportunity to live missionally in our city, where we gather as the Big C Church, looking at our partners like Woodman Valley Chapel or New Life Church or Rocky Mountain Calvary. We gather together and we live missionally in our city. You can see the app for more details about City Serve, but we'd love for you to join us.
And here at Mountain Springs, we are all about transforming lives from the neighborhoods to the nations. And today, we get to hear a message from Ben Stewart, who is with Uncharted International. It is going to be an amazing message, and I don't want you to miss it. But before we do that, would you guys just join us in worship?
To declare the reign of the Lord. there, Mountain Springs family. Great to see you guys, and it's wonderful to be with you in this capacity. As you heard, my name is Ben Stewart, and there's actually a few different ways we're connected, my family and I, to the Mountain Springs family. Yes, it is through a partnership between Mountain Springs and the organization that I get to be a part of called Uncharted International. And I wish I had time to share with you guys just some of the amazing things that God is doing through this partnership. If you're familiar a little bit with Uncharted, we work in some of the most unreached, overlooked places in the world. Places where when I'm being recorded like this, I can't even mention the specific locations. But one thing that I just want to say to you guys is this, is that as a result of the partnership through Mountain Springs and Uncharted, God is doing some amazing things in these types of places, that God's kingdom is alive, it's thriving, it's moving. We may not always hear the ways about it in very overt public ways, but know that you, church, are making a significant impact in some of the most difficult, challenging places. So thank you for that. I at least wanted to say that. Yeah, absolutely. On a more personal level, our family, we actually used to live here in Colorado Springs many years ago, and this was the church family that we were a part of. And then ministry and the Lord took us to southern Indiana, right on the southern tip of Indiana. Yep, wow, exactly. It was right on the border of Kentucky, so I like to say it's where the Midwest meets the hillbillies. And if you're from Kentucky, you're welcome for the compliment. So, but after 7 years, it's the year of Jubilee for the Stewart family, and we are moving back to Colorado, which we're super pumped about. So we're actually in the process of moving from Indiana to Colorado. Because of the travel that I do, we're gonna hang out up in the Denver area near the airport, but what it means is we get to do this more frequently, just come and hang out with you guys, and super blessed to be a part of this family in that way. So, and I'm excited about this series that you guys are doing. You're cruising your way, well, cruising is a loose term, I guess, depending on the Sunday, through the book of John. And it's been really fun to track with you guys as you've started this journey. You realize you have a long ways to go, but I love it. I admire that you guys as a church are saying this is something that we want to commit to. And so I have to say, we have a lot of work to do today. Daniel kept texting me as the week leading up to this saying, hey, can you take these verses too? Can you take these verses too? So we're up to almost 60 verses that we have to try to get through. And so I'm just gonna say this, there's gonna be some sections of this passage that we really hang out in, and then there's other parts of the passage where I just sort of summarize or skim over. So I know that we will be left wanting, and I apologize for that, but that's kind of where we are today. So let me pray. We're going to dive right in and just get to work. God, thank you for this time and place to gather together to worship you, to reorientate our minds, our hearts, our focus, our attention, our problems, our joys upon you. So Spirit, we just ask that you would speak, remove me from this equation, and just speak directly to your sons and daughters. Give us ears to hear, give us minds to understand, give us courage in our hearts to respond to what it is that you're saying to us. In your name. Amen. So if there is one theme that I could give to this whole section that we're going to be in, we're going to be picking up at the end of chapter 4 and moving all the way through chapter 5. And if there's one theme that I could put as sort of an overarching banner to this, it's this phrase of nature's revealed. Nature's revealed. And what I mean by that is what we're going to see in this section is two natures, human nature being one of them, revealed, really who we are at our core. We're gonna see some stark realities and frankly, some even sobering realities about what's really in us as people. But that's gonna lay side by side with a very powerful, beautiful, tender display or revelation of Jesus's nature as well. And so I want to just give that framework, that overarching framework of this idea of nature revealed and how they connect with each other as we turn to John chapter 4, verse 43. So remember, some context for this is that Jesus has just been spending time in Samaria. He met the woman at the well. He had this very powerful experience with her. And actually, that's something very important to note. We're going to come back to that in a second. The woman, that section ends with the woman going back to her village and sharing about Jesus. And it says the whole community came out and believed in Jesus. And so it's on the tail end of that. Remember, when Scripture was written, it didn't have any verses or chapter breaks. Like John just sees this as a continuing story. And so in verse 43, we pick up and Jesus is on the move again. It says, at the end of 2 days, Jesus went on to Galilee. So he's coming back into his home space, his home region. At the end of 2 days, Jesus went on to Galilee. Verse 44, he himself had said that a prophet is not honored in his own hometown. Yet the Galileans welcomed him, for they had been in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration and had seen everything he did there. Okay, we got to pause right here because John is giving us some really important contextual clues about what's happening here, about this space, and more significantly, this crowd that Jesus is stepping back into his own hometown. And it's a little bit interesting because on the surface, it feels like John is contradicting himself. In verse 44, it says, Jesus himself said that a prophet is not honored in his own hometown. Yet, the Galileans welcomed him. So wait, who's right? What's happening here? Is John wrong? Is Jesus wrong? Well, there's actually a lot of irony in the way that John is writing. And what he's doing is he's giving us a really powerful clue about what the heart intent is of these people, because this is the same exact language in verse 44 and 45. If you go back to the end of John chapter 2, verse 23 says, because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him, here's our phrase, no one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. So in John chapter 4, at the end, when Jesus is coming back into his own hometown, on the surface, it seems like these people are super excited and welcoming Jesus back in. But John is giving us this clue that Jesus is fully aware of what's actually in the heart, what is actually motivating these people to come to Jesus in the first place. John gives us another clue in verse 46. As he traveled through Galilee, he came to where? Cana. Remember what happened in Cana? A few Sundays ago, you had this great message about Jesus' first miracle, water to wine, right? So it's another clue of, okay, he's coming back into this place where he performed his first miracle. John is wanting us to understand that the way that this crowd views Jesus, at best, is the miracle maker, but certainly not the coming Messiah. I mean, really how they're viewing Jesus is, this is the water to wine guy. It's like they're saying, Jesus is coming back from, I don't know why he went to Samaria in the first place, but he's coming back. This is the guy who turned water to wine. Hey, go get your mugs and maybe he'll turn it into a fat tire or something like that. And if that sounds a little disrespectful, that's kind of the point. That's how this crowd was receiving Jesus and viewing him. So this is really important to understand, especially because of how Jesus responds to a particular individual. Because it's in this context, in verse 46, it says, there was a government official in nearby Capernaum whose son was very sick. And when he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal his son who was about to die. Like, just hear that description. And for a second, try to put yourself in that man's shoes. And here's a first revelation of our human nature. Can you imagine the level of desperation that this guy felt? Can you imagine the level of need and this sense of, I have complete powerlessness over this situation? This guy is wrecked for his child. And so Jesus' response at first sounds harsh until you remember what's happening with this crowd. Jesus says, will you never believe in me unless you see miraculous signs and wonders? But again, what's important to understand here is that in the original language, that you, that's not a singular you. He's actually not addressing that man specifically. It's a plural you. He's talking to the crowd. And so Jesus sees this man as a representation of the natural state in which this whole crowd is in, the real motive in which they are coming to him. And it's especially profound when you think about Jesus just left Samaria. And in Samaria, he's meeting with this marginalized individual, this woman at the well, who then goes and gets the whole city, the whole town. And what does it say about that town? It says that they believed in him. Jesus didn't have to perform one miracle in Samaria, and the whole city believed in him. And here he is in his own hometown, and he knows that in the nature of humanity, all that they care about is, what can you do for me? And we get this very stark, sobering reality and reminder of our desperation and our powerlessness and our need. And maybe that's where you find yourself in this moment or in this season. Maybe even some of you are like, look, I don't understand this whole God thing. I don't get religion. I don't get this whole church thing. I don't even really know who Jesus is, but I will confess I am at the end of my rope. I have no other solution. I have nothing else to turn to. I have tried every other thing, and I don't know. I heard rumor of some people who get together and do this thing on Sunday, and I don't know who else to turn to or what else to go to, and so I'm going to try this church thing, this Jesus thing, this God thing, because I don't really know what else to do. And that's where Jesus meets this man. And what's beautiful about this encounter is that even though Jesus knows the true heart of this individual, he knows that this man at first is not coming to him because he's the Messiah, because he's the Son of God. He's coming to him because he's the party trick guy. He's the guy that turned water to wine. He's the guy that maybe can do something. I don't really know who he is. And Jesus responds by healing his son. And that story continues with Jesus saying, "Go back home, your son will live." And so the man goes back home, and it's a day journey, because the next day he gets home, his servant says to him, "Your son is alive and well." And when he inquires when the son got better, it was the day before, the moment when Jesus said, "Your son will live." And to this man's credit, his story is a story, an arc of redemption. It said that this man believed, and his whole family. But what we see in this first story is we begin to catch a glimpse of the reality of our human nature. That we can all resonate with seasons or moments of feeling desperate, of feeling powerless, at the end of our rope, not really knowing where else to turn. And this description of human nature continues in chapter 5. We pick up in chapter 5, and it says in verse 1, "Afterwards, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethsaida, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, 'Would you like to get well?'" All right, there's so much happening in this story, and we only have time for a few little things. But the first thing I want us to see is that actually in these first few verses, John, as he writes, the way he writes is actually a little bit different than how he normally tells a story. There's a lot of detail that he leaves out on purpose. There's a few things that we're actually not totally sure of. First of all, he doesn't mention which holy day or which festival this is. He doesn't actually tell us what specific disease was ailing this person. He just calls him an invalid. Even though he names the sheep gate and the pool of Bethsaida, archaeologists and commentators, there's a little bit of like, well, maybe it was over here in the city wall. Maybe it was over here. There's several things, like even the stirring up of the waters that we're going to read about in a second. Is that like, do angels actually come down and stir it up? Was it more of like a superstition? And John, sort of on purpose, is leaving a lot of details out. And I think it's because he wants us to keep our eyes on the primary focus of what's happening here. And one of those things is, this is the first time in John's gospel that Jesus initiates the miracle. So if you remember in the Cana miracle, when he turns water to wine, it's his mom who approaches him, right? And you always do what mom says, right? In the second miracle, the one that we just read, it's this man who's desperate, who's needy, whose son is on his deathbed, who comes and asks Jesus for the miracle. But here, Jesus initiates. Jesus takes the first step towards this man to offer healing. And as we get to know this guy a little bit, that point, as profound as it is in and of itself, becomes all the more powerful. Because look at what type of person this man is. You would think that Jesus, for the first miracle in the Gospel of John that he initiates, he's gonna pick the right person to do that with, right? Like this is his moment when he's stepping into somebody's life. You would think that he's gonna pick somebody who's lived at least a semi-righteous life, or at least a life of some goodness and maybe even some power and position and dignity and things of that nature. And we see at least like a good human being, right? Not at all. Jesus asked that question, would you like to get well? And we would expect to hear a resounding, yes! I have been sick for 38 years. Yes! But what does he say? I can't. I can't, the sick man said. For I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me. Do you hear what's in this man? You hear the bitterness and the resentment. And you can't blame the guy, right? He's been there for 38 years. I don't know the frequency of the bubbling up of the water. I don't know, again, if it was actually angels coming down and stirring it up, if it was this superstitious thing. But bottom line, here's this guy who for 38 years, what does he say? He says, every time I try to step into this pool where supposedly as soon as you get in, if you were the first one, you would come away healed from whatever ailed you. Every time I try to get in, for 38 years, somebody else gets in first. I'd be a little bitter too. Right? That sense of like, are you kidding me? I thought today was my day. How come their problem was solved today? How come they have a better situation? How come their family's doing better than mine? How come I haven't received that? How come the promotion hasn't happened to me? When is it my turn, God? All right. That's what's happening with this man. There's bitterness, there's resentment, there's a sense of loss of hope. Do you want to get better? I can't. This guy has been laying next to this pool, which at best is stirred up by angels, maybe is superstitious, and now he has God himself approaching him in his life saying, do you want to get better? And he's lost so much hope that his response is, I can't. He is utterly hopeless. And he blame shifts. He blame shifts. Later, as the story continues, Jesus continues on. He says in verse 8, stand up, pick up your mat and walk. And instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. But, okay, if you're an underliner or a circler or a highlighter or whatever, here's the key phrase of this whole chunk of passage. The miracle happened on the Sabbath. So the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, you can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry the sleeping mat. But the man replied, the man who healed me told me, pick up your mat and walk. And they said, who said such a thing as that? The man didn't know. All right, so again, this guy, this is not a picture of a really high quality individual. This guy is not only bitter and resentful and he's lost hope, but now he's been healed by Jesus, but he has no clue who Jesus actually is. He didn't even pause to like, hey, thanks. By the way, what's your name? No, he just takes off. He gets confronted by these religious officials who are saying, actually, you're breaking a law right now and you're in trouble because you are carrying this mat on the Sabbath day. And again, the man doesn't go, oh, whoa, wait, you have no idea what just happened and how radically my life has been changed, and let me tell you all about the person of Jesus Christ and how he can save your life too. No, what does he do? He blame shifts. Oh, well, the man who healed me, he told me to pick up my mat. He told me it's his fault. Now, does that sort of language sound familiar? Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve have disobeyed, they're hiding, God finds them. He says to Adam, what's the deal? Why did you do this? And Adam's response is, well, the woman that you put in the garden, it's your fault, God, because you gave me this woman, and it's her fault because she got me to eat. And then God says to Eve, okay, so what's going on? Oh, well, God, the serpent that you made and you put in the garden, it's its fault, it's his fault. So blame shift. And here we are in John chapter 4, and human nature is exactly the same. So we see a pretty sobering, bleak, but if we're honest, realistic description of human nature. But this is where things really turn around. So Jesus heals this man. This man gets confronted by these religious leaders. And these religious leaders realize, okay, well, then it's Jesus' fault. Whoever this Jesus guy is, it's his fault for telling this man to pick up his mat and to work on Sabbath. So now the Jewish leaders confront Jesus. And this is where we begin to get a beautiful picture and a powerful picture of the nature of who Jesus really is. Verse 16, so the Jewish leaders began harassing, I love that word, but note that word. The Jewish leaders began harassing Jesus, why? For breaking the Sabbath rules. But Jesus replied, my Father is always working, and so am I. So the Jewish leaders tried all the harder to find a way to kill him. Wait a minute, kill him? How did we go from harassing him to wanting to kill him in such a short amount of time? Because what Jesus is saying here in this one line, my Father is always working and so am I, is scandalous in the eyes of these religious leaders. And what Jesus knows is we're familiar with the religious law of that day that said you can't work on Sabbath. So Jesus knows this. You can't work on Sabbath. But Jesus is also aware of Jewish tradition of that day. The Jewish tradition of that day believed this, that even though it was required by all humanity in creation to rest on Sabbath day, that God himself was not only allowed, quote unquote, to continue his work on Sabbath, but was actually expected to. In other words, because God was the creator of all things, and because God is the sustainer of all life, Jewish tradition believed, okay, not only do we hope and expect that God is working on the Sabbath, but we actually need God to work on the Sabbath. We need the sustainer of life to keep working, because if he stops working, then everything falls apart. And so, according to Jewish tradition, it was not only okay that God was working on Sabbath, it was needed. And so now, here's Jesus being confronted for, why did you, in fact, work or tell this man to work on Sabbath? And Jesus says, now, if Jesus had said, God is always working, they would have been like, yeah, we know. But what does he say? He says, my Father is always working. And then he takes it a step further and he says, and so am I. So what he's saying in essence to the Jewish people is, look, you think it's okay for God to work on the Sabbath, so you should think it's okay for me to work too, because I'm God. And so that's why in verse 18, the Jewish leaders tried all the harder to find a way to kill him, for he not only broke the Sabbath. So at first it started by a rule breaking, but now he called God his Father, thereby making himself equal with God. And from verses 19 through the end of the chapter, we see Jesus revealing his nature. And this is the first thing we see. We see that he is God. He is God. Jesus explained, I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He does only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son does also. For the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he is doing. In fact, the Father will show him how to do even greater works, that's his death and resurrection, than healing this man. Now, here's what's great about this claim that he is God, is that Jesus then goes on to qualify what this claim, this unity, this equality with God looks like. That it's not just Jesus putting himself on the same level as God, as like these two separate entities, but he actually goes on in the verses we just said, where he shows there's this oneness and this unity between the two. He talks about how his works, his ministry, his life flow from and reveal who the Father is. D.A. Carson, theologian, says it this way: the Son, by his obedience to his Father, is acting in such a way that he is revealing the Father, doing the Father's deeds, and performing the Father's will. Okay, man, I wish we could just marinate on this for a long time, because think of the beauty and the power of that. Based on what did we just see in the previous two stories? If it's true that Jesus reveals to us the nature of who the Father is, if it's true that Jesus reveals to us the way in which God works, if it's true that Jesus reveals to us the way in which the Father desires to minister to us, go back. I wish I could have preached this message backwards, this passage backwards, because now go back to the person that he just healed. He just stepped into, of his own free will, the life of a person who's angry, who's bitter, who's given up hope, who's blame shifting. And Jesus reveals in that moment what the Father is really like. He says, actually, despite all of that, I still want to bring healing into your life. Friends, I wonder if there are spaces in our life where the Father is saying, I'd love to bring healing there. And for whatever reason, our response is, I can't. I can't forgive that person so that that relationship is restored. I can't let that dream go. I can't let that resentment be surrendered to you. I just can't. And what's beautiful about the nature of who Jesus is, we see that he is God. We see that also, continuing in verse 21 through 22, that he is the ultimate authority. Look what he does with this ultimate authority. For just as the Father gives life to those he raises from the dead, so the Son gives life to anyone he wants. In addition, the Father judges no one. Instead, he has given the Son absolute authority. He has given the Son absolute authority to judge. This is sweet. That there's such this unity, this mysterious dynamic between the Father and the Son, that the Father actually says, look, here's the deal. Like I have authority to give life, I'm giving you authority to give life to anyone you want. And in fact, there's this way in which the Father is saying, I'm gonna abdicate my right to bring judgment, to judge the world, and I'm gonna give that right to you, my Son. Now go back just a couple of weeks to John 3:16 and 17. We all know John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world, he sent his only Son into the world that whoever believes in him should receive life and not perish, right? But then it goes on and says, Jesus says, I did not come to condemn the world, but save it. So the Father says, I give you all authority. I give you the right to judge, to deem what is necessary for the world. And Jesus says, you know what I deem is necessary? It's not condemnation, it's salvation. This is who the Father is, because it's who we see Jesus being. So we see Jesus' nature is revealed, that he is God, that he is one with the Father, that he reveals who the Father is, that because of this unity and this equality and this oneness that exists between Father and Son, that he has ultimate authority. And then finally we see in verse 23 that he is worthy of all honor, just like we sang about in that last song. And in this little section, there are 4 fours, F-O-R, that all build on each other. They're like stair steps, like the one points to the next, and that one points to the next, and that one points to the last one. They build on each other, sort of climaxing or pointing to this verse, so that, verse 23, everyone will honor the Son. Just as they honor the Father, anyone who does not honor the Son is certainly not honoring the Father who sent him. In other words, he's saying to the religious leaders, look, you're all about honoring God. That's great. But actually, you should be honoring me as well, because I am God. And when you honor me, that's when you actually honor God. And if you say you honor God, but you don't honor me, then you're not actually honoring the Father. So we see this beautiful, powerful display. It's like Jesus is giving us this little glimpse into the nature, the reality of who he actually is. In the last section, I wish we had a whole lot of time to go through the last section. If I could label the last section, it's this label of, can I get a witness? And Jesus spends time giving 4 different witnesses to his claims, because he knows that's what he's saying. Look, I could stand up here and make the same claims as Jesus right now, right? But you all know I'd be crazy. I'd be a lunatic. And so Jesus goes and he gives 4 witnesses for why his claims are valid, that he is God, that he has all authority, and that he is worthy of honor. So as we end, we have to ask the question, where does this leave us? Where does this leave us? And as I was praying over this for my own life, I think there was one primary conviction and encouragement and thought that I just felt like God kept saying is okay, you see these 2 natures laying side by side. Us, human nature. And we all like to see ourselves in the story as the hero. We all like to see ourselves in the story as the person who has their crap together. But the reality is, in the story, we resonate with and connect more to those first 2 guys, to the human nature revealed. The brokenness, the hurt, the hopelessness, the anger, the bitterness. And what I felt the Lord was saying through this whole theme is, I want you to notice something, my child. Notice how the divine nature always moves closer to the human nature. The perfect, the loving, the forgiving, the powerful, the one who has authority to give life, the one who is worthy of all honor. This is not a God who is just perpetually angry at you, just waiting for you to somehow prove yourself to him. This is not a God who's distant. This is not a God who is disappointed in you. This is not a God who's waiting for you to get to some level of goodness. This is not a God who's waiting for you to be nicer and more kind, and then maybe he'll think about entering into your life. The divine nature of God is to step into all of your brokenness, is to step into all of your messiness, into all of your hurt, and ask one simple question: can I heal you? So God, we receive your presence in our lives today. Whether we have been followers of you for a long time or not, I need you to break into my life again, God. In the spaces where I say I can't, I confess those to you, and I say I need you to. I need you to ignore my I can't, and I need you to heal me anyways. Thank you, Jesus, that you reveal the Father. You reveal his love. You reveal his tenderness, his presence, his pursuit, his kindness. So may we leave here today as people who catch just a little bit more the beauty of your nature revealed to us. In your name, amen.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'd love to see you right back here next week while we continue in our message series through the book of John.
We love you, Mountain Springs. Have a great week.